Hi, this is Joe Ziemba, the host of When Football Was Football here on the Sports History Network. Aside from my podcasting duties, I'm also a sports collector. And as such, I'm very pleased to share the exciting news that the Sports History Network has partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get deals on over 30,000 autograph sports collectibles. So as a collector, I was very pleased when I visited the site of Rochester Sports Autographs. The massive inventory is easy to search, carefully documented, and visually appealing. The options seem limitless, whether you're looking for an autographed baseball, signed football helmets, or basketball jerseys, among thousands of others. I found everything from a Babe Ruth autograph, a signed football by Dick Butkus, and an autographed Larry Bird basketball jersey. And as a collector, you'll be delighted with the very competitive pricing on JSA authenticated products. Made possible since RSA deals directly with athletes, so there's no extra markup, and the savings are passed on directly to the customer. Perhaps you're looking for an early gift for Mother's Day or Father's Day. Heck, who needs a holiday as an excuse to give a piece of sports history to your loved ones? Or how about yourself? Today seems like a great day to add to your own sports collection, right? RSA even has film, music, and other entertainment autographs on the site, so there's something for everyone. All orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and a money-back guarantee. And to make sure RSA knows that the Sports History Network sent you, we created a special link for you. All you need to do is head to shoprsa.com/SHN. That's shoprsa.com/SHN to get your own piece of sports history today.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. On April 23rd, 1985, Coca-Cola announced a new Coke, something the CEO said in a press conference would be, quote, smoother, rounder, yet bolder, a more harmonious flavor. Many said it basically turned into Pepsi. Well, either way, less than 3 months later, on July 11th, it was announced that the OG would return and it would be called Coca-Cola Classic, and the ultimate draft day bust move if we equated this into fantasy football. But when you think of it, the Coca-Cola executives probably made the right decision, even though at the time, they were in what we could call the Crossroads. Welcome to Fantasy Football Origin Stories, where each episode is a journey back in time to explore the unique experiences of some of the coolest and most influential people in the fantasy football industry. I'm your host, Arnie Chapman, also known as the Football History Dude. Now, I love fantasy football, and I want you to come along with me to explore the yesteryear of the armchair gridiron. So hop on board my DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour. This time we start with the DeLorean. The date is September 7th, 1985, and we are sitting in a booth at 162 East Superior Street in Chicago, Illinois. Now that address might not even mean much to you, but let's just say we're here to enjoy a world-famous Gino's East Deep Dish Pizza, baby. One of the most famous pizza joints in the country. In between a slice of pie, we overhear some Bears fans over there talking about how it's going to be their year this year. Remember, this is 1985. The next day, we were going to go attend the first game of the season. Da Bears would be taking on the swashbuckling Buccaneers in Soldier Field. A game our beloved Bears ended up winning 38-28, and our number one draft pick, of course, you know it, Sweetness, Walter Payton, ended the game with a stat line of 120 yards rushing, 6 catches for 37 yards. Sweetness was at it again, baby. In fact, he'd stay on a tear for the rest of the year, capturing his second NFL MVP and Offensive Player of the Year award, and oh yeah, Bears, the Fighting Dickas would lose only one game the whole year, And it wasn't the playoffs because the Bears captured the Lombardi Trophy this year. We've talked about this season in one of our other episodes, I'm pretty sure, of our fantasy football history moment, but we'll cover it again just to be safe. As far as the rankings go for the fantasy football, that is, for Pro Football Reference, Sweetness was actually number 4 that year. Marcus Allen was a top point getter, then Roger Craig at number 2, and Joe Morris at number 3. Nonetheless, a successful and enjoyable year, and if you picked up Walter Payton in the first round, even the number 1 overall pick, I think you're pretty happy with that outcome. But it kind of sort of means a little bit more to one of this week's guests, which is why we have this little tie-in, and we'll bring that up in the interview. But speaking of this week's guest, this will be the first time we have multiple guests on the same episode, so we got them coming from both ends of the ears. We bring in the host of Crossroads Fantasy Football. On the mics tonight, we will have Seth Miller and Payton Docheff. 2 league mates that realized they had so much more to talk about with each other than the standard smack talk for the upcoming week in their fantasy football league. We'll get into their fantasy football origin story, if you will, in a minute. But first, this is a good time for me to remind you or make sure that you subscribe or follow for free to this show in your podcast player of choice. That way you get the hottest, freshest out the press episodes, well, each and every week. And if you've done that already, well, great Scott. How about now heading over to that podcast app and leaving an honest rating and review? And now that you've completed your homework assignment for the day, we're back at the Crossroads. So let's get in the interview with the dudes over at Crossroads Fantasy Football. Are you guys, I mean, other than just you two, do you normally have guests on your other show that you've had in the past or no?
We are so, well, Payton says we just chat. I was about to say we're so structured, like with how the show is. At least for me, I know Payton is way less structured in terms of what he like leaves notes-wise for himself, but I would just be a mess if I had to actually like try and give all of the stats that I want to give while also having a guest on. So
Seth is my weekly guest.
Yeah,
there you go. Well, let's just start with that then. So, I mean, one of the first questions I like to ask everybody is, you guys kind of dug into it, but okay, Payton, go ahead and give me what's the team that you root for naturally?
I like the Chicago Bears.
All right, and Seth, you are
Titans,
what fan?
Titans, unfortunately. We're doing
okay,
something.
well, don't say unfortunately. I mean, all 3 of us, hey, you know what? Well, you've got the most success as of late. That's for true. Us. Even you got King Henry over there. And unfortunately, yeah, neither one of us, none of us have really had a lot of success as of late in our lifetimes, but it's coming. It will be there. Sorry for the black and blue division. Payton, you are going to have to go down in the bottom of the cellar here for a while, but you might be number 2, actually. We'll see what happens in the next couple of years.
I got to witness a pretty solid run when I was like a freshman in high school.
Was that back
Bears.
when you're talking about the Devin Hester and they went to the Super Bowl and everything?
That is exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, I don't want to steal
first play, kick return for a touchdown.
Yeah, I don't want to steal your thunder, but so that was the year that we got my cat, like our first quote baby, right after we got married, and her name is Peyton Manning Chapman. So like we named the cat after Peyton Manning. It's kind of funny you brought up this story. You said you were named after a famous player too, right?
Yeah, my dad named me after Walter Payton. Actually, no affinity for Chicago or the Bears. He just liked the guy. And so actually me and my brother both have kind of sports names. My brother's name is Dodge, and his middle name was Ryan. So the middle initial just kind of spelling Dodger. My dad wanted a Dodger. Then I was Payton after Walter Payton. And so just I always loved the Bears, even though my family didn't really, just because as soon as I could learn what sports and football was, I was being gifted autobiographies and biographies and just like learning about the Bears by nature of me being me and being interested in the player for whom I was a namesake. So
are you naturally
that stuck with it.
Are you naturally like a sports history fan in general besides just the Bears then, or is it you just focus mostly on the Bears?
No, that was it. So that was my entryway into liking football and then later fantasy football, but it was through a very, very narrow lens of just getting to know a specific player really well because I was told that there was some importance to it, and that's kind of how it went.
Yeah, I mean, the guy that I grew up thinking I was going to be until obviously I wasn't was Barry Sanders, and you know, two of the greatest, they get arguably them plus Jim Thorpe get thrown in as like possibly the greatest running backs or players of all time. So I guess we're each in good company. How about you, Seth? How'd you get into football in general?
Oh man, probably NFL Street if I had to guess. Which would Xbox original.
Which is a great avenue. Wow.
That wasn't the first game system that we had the football on, but Nintendo 64. I remember Steve McNair on a cover. Might have been how I ended up being a Titans fan. Definitely don't live in Tennessee. Never have. Just, it's whoever, I don't know. My dad was never a sports fan like Payton's, I guess, but it was never the local team for me. So it was Titans. And we had Eddie George, Steve McNair, that crew, Samari Roll. So that's how I ended up being a Titans fan. It's more of a, I don't know, more of just a fan of whoever I want for fantasy football now, but I'll still follow them.
You know, we're going to get into that fantasy football. Like you said, we talked about that in other episodes of how it's almost taken over a lot of people. Like, I'm a fan of this team for whatever reason. As a Lions fan, of course, a lot of them not having a great seasons and such. It's easy to gravitate towards your favorite players. And I think that's why I was a Colts fan, and Peyton Manning is I would always try to target him as a, I mean, I probably drafted him earlier than he should, but that was back before, it was cool to take quarterbacks in the 15th round or whatever it might be and everything like that. And I would say that the you mentioned NFL Street, but like for me as growing up, even it's like I already was going to be a fan. It was like my grandpa, my dad was blessed into the family of a football fan, but Madden really took it to a whole new level. And I think that fantasy football, Madden, both of them. Now I'm talking about real NFL, like the Pro Football Hall of Fame stuff. They have like that separate category for contributors. I think somehow they do need to consider that, like putting some, like there's so many fans of the sport because of video games, fantasy football, that never would have even considered looking at the NFL, I think.
Yeah, and I guess even before that would be sports cards. That was definitely how Peyton and I first hung out for the most of our time, was just opening packs,
Actually, yeah.
Walmart, seeing what we got, and just sorting them out and seeing about trades. Which is just
sports.
So much sport card trading. Hours of sport card trading as a precursor for us just discussing hours of fantasy football trading probably 5 to 10 years later.
So what was the biggest, I don't know, we'll call it the biggest find you got in a pack of cards that you cherish the most or something?
It wasn't even one that I found, but I traded a friend on the bus for a rookie Drew Brees card, which I didn't even know at the time like what that would be. I still have it. It's bent on the corner, always has been, because that was just the kind of friend he was. But it's a sweet trade. I still have the card, but anything for you, Peyton?
Yeah, do you have any cards that just hit home, maybe opening up a pack and you knew right then, man, whoa, this is the card. This is awesome.
Man, that takes me way back. I actually had like a holographic Nolan Ryan set, so not to stray away from football, but that was probably the thing that I liked the most.
Well, yeah, the Express, or what was it, the Big Express, or what was his nickname? I forgot.
Nolan? I'm not sure.
Oh, no, was it just the Nolan Ryan Express? I don't remember what I remember. It was something Express. Well, anyway, the reason why I bring that story up again, not to stray from football, but my dad, who fantasy football, like this is in our blood playing fantasy football together. But he nicknamed himself the Big Arn Express because I'm Arnie Chapman. He's Big Arn, so that was his nickname after Nolan Ryan.
Solid.
Again, nothing to do with football, but it's something that football is family. Fantasy football, especially for many of us, really truly is family, and like that brings people together in conversations at the dinner table or even over holidays, especially Thanksgiving and Christmas, maybe more than a lot of other things. I mean, that's a memory, I guess you could say, about like, hey, Peyton, what's your first fantasy football memory when you first got into it?
So it was in middle school for me. I think I actually started probably 2005 or 2006. And it was when you're that age, or when I was that age and getting into it, it wasn't as sectored off into your friend groups as it is now for me as an adult. It was like you scraped your way into a league. And so at the time, it was like maybe 3 to 4 friends that were trying to get into it, plus our family members, plus a few random people that joined the open room that we had on ESPN. And so that was my entry into it. I actually distinctly remember I thought proposing trades was the funnest thing in the world, that you can kind of construct your own ecosystem. Like as Seth was talking about NFL Street, you get to choose your player and get a different player grade based on what you choose to focus on. I was like, oh, it's my team. I could be good at this position or good at that position. But I didn't really understand the value of fantasy trades. So I just remember just always just proposing trades of just the worst players for the best players, thinking that that's just the game that you play. I was just out there hustling like a kid playing fantasy football. And I remember getting this email from probably the aunt or uncle of a friend that I had started the league with. And it just said, "Hey, Payton, love the enthusiasm, but are you serious with these trades?" And I was very embarrassed for a couple of weeks, and I definitely died it down. But yeah, in that same league, I remember going over to my friend's house and co-writing matchup previews and reports at the desktop computer in his mom's kitchen before smashing NCAA on Xbox. And so even from the beginning, I was really interested in the matchups and just adding some form of extra media onto the message boards as it pertained to the league.
Wow. So even in the middle school era, you were actually providing, I guess you could call it, the first, almost like a podcast, like you were doing your own show, kind of like how the fantasy footballers started off with doing a podcast on their own show type of thing, but through you said the message board type thing was the medium?
Yeah, it was a very proto version. We would just hop on to the ESPN chat that was provided and just go through matchup after matchup and just guess who was going to win and talk about the teams and things like that.
Huh. Yeah, we did that. Well, I mean, I guess it was I hosted it, but then we had my dad hop on and do some random funny stuff like skits like SNL for our league called the King Cobra League, and it was maybe back in 2009, 2010. I don't remember the exact date. Long story short, we only did it for the 1 year, and if it was copyright infringement nowadays, forget about it because of all of the music that we used and we shouldn't have used. But yeah, that's just interesting that you were that young and you really got into that side of things. What about you, Seth? You remember your first like fantasy football league or memory?
I have a couple, but all I'm hearing from Payton is things that I didn't know in the past, and that it's something that he could be doing for our current league that I'm the one having to do along with everything else. So I'll put that on the back burner for when I'm looking for more content for our league, that you actually have experience doing that as well. So thanks, Payton.
I've aged out.
Yeah. I'm getting there. I'm getting tired of our league, so they're still fun. I have two memories I'd say that I remember. Just vaguely, I don't even know. I was probably in middle school like Payton because I'm just a year younger than him. But one was a Harry Potter themed league. I remembered it was cool to have themed leagues. I wasn't even into Harry Potter, but like Payton said, you just kind of find a league, and this was one that I like had vague connections with. So I was like, I'll play. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll play. Don't remember any players I drafted in that one. The second memory would be the player that I do remember drafting only because he hurt me so much, and that was CJ Spiller. And I know he had like one decent half of a year maybe once, but I remember that I was his first round pick, super pumped for him, and just did terrible for me. Don't remember doing well in that league, but those are my two memories that stick out for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, CJ Spiller was supposed to be just really, I mean, he was fast coming out. I think it was Syracuse. He had an orange helmet. That's all I remember. But yeah, no, I mean, you guys are making me feel a little bit old because you're talking grade school, basically.
Yeah, we're a little younger.
Yeah, I was already graduated and I was already like at my job, and I was a supervisor of the job and stuff like that and everything. So, you know, my first memories of fantasy football go back a little bit. Like, I wasn't quite as young. I think I actually, you know, for being a fantasy football origin story, I really need to nail this one down for when people ask me the question, but I can't remember if I knew I played baseball fantasy and basketball. I just remember in high school printing out, now this was in math class, so it was kind of technically doing some math, but we would print out the salary cap, all the cheat sheets of what it was, and we would like pretend, okay, how can we find the best math, you know, or the best matchup and everything with the salary cap using the calculators in the back of the classroom and everything. So this is before, like, you know, doing the online drafts and all that type of thing. Speaking of that, so Payton said ESPN War Room, whatever it was called. Have you ever been in a live, like, in-person draft or no?
We try every year and get ours to convert, our home league that we've been in for like, I think it's 12 years now. Can't get them to convert, but since we have recently joined a league that we don't even know the people. I think they found us on Twitter as well. But Johnny Football.
Mhm.
We joined his fantasy league. He's awesome. He hosts a podcast for his own league, and it's a bit of a high stakes league for the Kansas City area. Just happened to find us we have I think Kansas City's marked in our Twitter bio. So he just searched through that. We got to hear a whole podcast about how he ended up finding us, but that's our one live draft. And it's so much more fun, just the slow draft that we did, and you're able to do trades on the clock. There was no set time clock, but I wish we did more than what we do have, which is just one.
I have been in a few other offline drafts in separate leagues, and they're always fun. I specifically remember one college year where I took LaShawn McCoy with the 5th overall pick. That was one of my first. That was probably my first offline draft, and I remember some guy turned to me and personally thanked me for making that pick so that he could take the pick that he did next. Of course, Shady overcame that player, but the in the moment buffoonery that can happen in these offline drafts is always a treat.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Yeah, you'll thank a person that at the end of the year the other guy's holding up the championship belt. Well, was that when Shady was with Buffalo when it was at his back 9 of his career? I'm using air quotes here.
No, it was early Shady. It was like his breakout season.
Oh, so you got him right before he broke out.
Yeah.
And you got it, and everyone's like, "Oh man, where'd this guy see him coming from?" Okay, so I was going to ask a question, and you can answer it however you want. This is that DeLorean. Now, this is the first time we're actually truly hopping in the DeLorean. We'll start with Payton because you just talked about that live draft. You can go back to any draft, and you can give yourself one piece of advice. What would that be?
Ooh. I think just because Le'Veon Bell smoked me, it's to always approach the early rounds with caution and then approach the later rounds with aggression. And that's, I think, something that Seth and I both do. It's something that we talk about a lot. But I can think of few examples that exist as more just clear of the pinnacle of why that concept exists, is that just back off, take the player that you're going to see get guaranteed production, don't lose it in the first couple of rounds, and then take your shots later on.
What about you, Seth? If you could go back to any specific draft, whether as general advice like what Payton said, or maybe do you have a specific moment time where you never took a kicker in the first round, right?
No, and we finally booted kickers out of our home league just this last year, so that was a long time coming.
Oh, good for you.
It took a while. It took till 2023, but I don't know. Depending on how far back we would go, there's like the basic advice of don't try and count last year's stats towards, the next year. That's where I probably fell in a lot of pitfalls early on. If there's any kind of, how is another way you phrase the question?
So another one could be, that's a general, or do you have a specific, I don't know, I can think of, I like to pick up my dad on this show, but there was one time when I'm sitting there and I'm at work, mind you not, and he's on his, which I'm in, it's my main big money league I'm in, which is not really big money, but my main league I focus on the most. And, he's sitting there, I'm like texting back and forth or calling, whatever it was. He's like, yeah, I'm on the clock. I'm going to take Vince Young. This is like 9 overall, like the second year. And it's like, first off, you don't take quarterbacks a high second overall. You don't take Vince Young. And like, I would go back right now and I would find a way to make it so I could be in that, like that TV show Ghosts, where the guy can push his finger and he can change the button for him and not pick it. I would go back to that moment right now. Like maybe that's an example of one particular pick that you made or didn't make that you wish you would have.
He's too good of a drafter.
I'm a trader is where it's at. I can always trade myself out of trouble.
Go back to it. Okay, you can go back to a trade then. That's even okay. Let's do that. A trade that you made and you at the moment thought, man, this is not going to work out, but then it turned out beautiful in the end.
I remember, you always forget the bad ones that you probably accepted, but I do remember a good one that I did. It was during Josh Gordon's season, basically the season. I think he was suspended the first 4 games. I had traded for him during that time and then just got to reap the rewards of Josh Gordon for the rest of the season when he just didn't matter who was quarterback. He was just going out and putting up 200 yards every week. So that was fun.
Yeah, that was back when we thought he was going to be the second coming of, Jerry Rice or Randy Moss or whoever, and then it just off the field issues didn't really help out his game there a whole lot. So that you kind of tapped in a little bit, both of you, with some of the trading and some of the other types of like personalities. But if you had to label Payton yourself as, whether it's not just as a fantasy player in general, how would you label yourself as, like, what type of a player are you?
I would say I'm a player that specifically tries not to have a shtick about how to approach fantasy football. I think this is something that Seth and I talk about all the time. You listen to certain things, and if you find yourself thinking, oh, here they go again, because they're winding themselves down a path where they're going to force themselves to say something because it's the same thing that they've been saying for years. And I just think you're not beholden to that. You can always get a little bit better by identifying what a mistake or a weakness was and just allowing that to fade into your game so that you just become a little bit better every time. So if I find myself like always saying the same thing, like we'll go year after year, we'll try to like do lessons learned. And sometimes we'll actually like theme out our years where we're always like, oh, we're going to apply this concept into our strategy when we talk about this player, that player. It's possible that we can take that too far. At the end of every year, we refresh. It's like, what were we focusing on? Also, what mistakes did we make? And then how do we actually apply that going into the next year so that like you just got to change a little bit all the time until you get to as good as you want to be. So as a player, I just feel like I'm just the type of player it's hard to answer that question because it actually annoys me when people have a super strong answer to that question.
I have a strong
answer.
answer.
You Maybe he doesn't realize it, but he does have a strong answer to that question. You're now nicknamed Bruce Lee. Your mind like water, and whatever comes to you, you're going to change things around. I think you do have a very strong. You're so anti-strong point that you have a strong point to be able to be open to everything. What about Seth? Said he does have a strong point. So okay, go ahead. What's your position?
I know exactly what I am. I trade a lot and know that I might lose some. Generally, I'll have a couple in the league that they're confused why the other person's doing it. I'll also be quick to, like, everyone has their pre-draft grades on players. I'll be quick to pivot from those as soon as I'm getting new information that tells me otherwise. If you're a week behind on that, then you're probably already losing value in a trade the next week. So I'm generally pretty fast to move on.
That used to be one of my biggest problems. And I mean, at times still, because I romanticized where I picked a player, or like how much I fell in love with the player for the 4 months of preparation that you have until then week 1 or 2, and you probably can start figuring out by week 3, this isn't going to work out the way I thought it would, and then I used to hang on too long. Okay, I like to stake claim to different players throughout my team. What about Payton? We'll go to you. A favorite fantasy player when you factor in draft value, I don't know what other people thought about him, whatever it is. Like, if you could say this was my one favorite player I had on my team throughout all of my years.
That's a great question. I loved getting OBJ for free his rookie season. But I think I'm going to have to say Doug Baldwin. Doug Baldwin is just a signature Payton fantasy football player for some reason. There was a stretch that I just really admired about my own fantasy seasons where, like, what was it? I think I had Allen Robinson for Allen Robinson's breakout season, and then I had Doug Baldwin for Doug Baldwin's breakout season. But Doug Baldwin's breakout lasted like 3 solid years, right? And I just feel like I had him everywhere for that span, and he was never valued at a point that seems to equate to his play, and it's probably just because he's a smaller, scrappy guy, which normally I don't really care about. But in this case, I loved seeing Doug Baldwin as, I just would always call him my team captain. He would be the team captain on all of my teams, so he'd probably be my signature player over the past several years.
You kind of hit that. I haven't asked this question. So, what's your go-to team name?
Oh, there's no go-to. The team name's got to change, and it either needs to be something that specifically related to the history of the folks that are in your league, so that it's like funny but not funny, but also kind of like cringe, or it's just something completely random that doesn't make sense, that's a little bit funny universally, that you just throw onto your team. Probably my favorite was it was when Do you remember when the meme became popular to like say Bon Appetit with like bone apple teeth or just like random other ways of saying it that weren't actually true? I just remember like taking over a dynasty team and naming the team Fancy Tree Foodball to sound like fantasy football, just because it was in the age of high memes. And it wasn't great, but I'll still think about it to this day and get a little smile across my face.
That is definitely
bed.
Peyton's sense of humor, is the stuff that just makes you kind of shake your head, but you have to smirk a little. You didn't even mention your, I like your Dynasty one, which might not be original, but the Dynasty drive-ins and dives. And I even have a picture of you dressed as Guy Fieri for Halloween that I need to send so you can put as your little logo, but we haven't done that yet. Yeah.
Full commitment. Thank you. Please do send that my way.
Nice. I mean, I like that. What about you, Seth? I mean, pick either one first, team or favorite player of all time.
We'll go recent for all time because it was the latest windfall of money, I guess, in our home league was I think it was 2 years ago now that I drafted Cooper Kupp. I don't know what round, but I drafted him, ended up with Justin Jefferson, had Jonathan Taylor in his year, but Cooper was the star of that show. And so I will go with Cooper Kupp as my recent favorite. Team name wise, I'm like Peyton. I'm careful to not base my team name on a player because I trade often, and I don't want anyone to seem like they're off limits just because they're my team name. That would be a mistake. Or maybe you could name them and then be like, well, you got to give me a little extra because I got to think of a new team name. Peyton, do you remember any of my team names? I don't remember any good ones that I have. Mine are, I know, I had Monkey Business was a couple of years ago, which was an inside joke between myself and just one other person in the league whose wife accidentally messaged her group chat of friends, which included my wife, while they were getting down, but she was sending monkey emojis accidentally on her phone. So we were Monkey Business that year. And it was just a picture of the guy.
Oh, that's nice, because that name was lost on me.
It was
I'm
me
in the
and
league.
Matt.
I didn't know what it was.
Oh, bringing out different kind of stories all over the place. Not as fantasy football origin stories, but fantasy football I got you moments. So speaking of that, I mean, this is called the Fantasy Football Origin Stories. I naturally reached out because of, I saw your social Crossroads Fantasy. I mean, that's really initially why I wanted to bring you guys on here. Let's talk about, I don't know, go back to the beginning. Either one of you, whoever, what was the dawn of the idea for starting a podcast together?
Seth, do you want me to go and you can just tell me where I mess up?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we did our first podcast in 2018. But Seth and I got to this point where we would just constantly text about fantasy football. We realized kind of at the same time that we cared more than not only most people in our league, but probably most people on the earth. We would chat about the podcast we were listening to. We would complain about the podcast that we were listening to. We just text someone a novel about just one logical fallacy that some dude opened the show with or whatever it would be. And, I mentioned me trying specifically to not have a mega shtick that I use. We would identify those shticks and be like, look at what this persona made this fantasy analyst say, when really they should have said something else. And it just makes it completely unlistenable or whatever it might be. And honestly, back and forth with each other, we would just fight. We would play devil's advocate, arguing back and forth with one another, which I think is what led to Crossroads Fantasy Football, because we wanted to be able to give both sides on player specific takes, and not even that, but just to not straw man someone else so hard when you're giving a take, but to actually come to a resolution from both sides and just let the people that might be listening decide, because that's what real life is like. And people are too smart to, hear someone completely straw man an argument and think, oh, obviously your case is the best case, right? So we would just talk about this all the time, to the point where it's actually really difficult to track and manage and keep hold of. And I think at the same time we just said, should we buy some Yeti mics off eBay and do something about this? And so we did. And it in the early days, Seth is recording from his closet right now. I used to join him in there. There's really only room for one, but I would get off work. I would drive an hour to Seth's house. He would greet me with Seth juice, which is just a very tasty cocktail made out of whatever Seth happened to be carrying in his fridge. And we'd sit across from each other at a card table that we'd stuff right into that closet, and we would just talk about the players that we liked.
So how you said 2018? So as far as I don't know, it was just randomly whenever, or was there some kind of like plan? I mean, Seth said something about he always had more of the schedule or plan of what was going to happen, and you were more of like the kind of, I guess, whatever you want to call it, the color content. What was the intent, or how did it go near the beginning, and then as it transformed throughout the years?
I would say that Seth is extremely structured about his like show to show takes. But our structure generally about the show has just kind of like fallen into what it is now. But we probably started a lot more structured than we currently are. I don't know if Seth, if you'd say that was true. So we would just, meet weekly and do a weekly show. And what we would do is we would try to create segments that we could like specifically have both a drop for, but also the ability to, in our own separate times, think of ways to fill that particular section of the show. If you have you can have 10 or 20 of them. And so in order to build a show together, you just pick the ones that happen to jump out at you that particular week. And so that's the way we just started. We're just like, what's interesting to us? How do we talk about it more than once? And how do we make it, somewhat sustainable and unified over the course of the next 10 to 15 weeks?
And that was definitely...
So then...
go
ahead.
I was going to say, that was... When we first started, it was weekly, and it was during redraft season. We were like strictly focused on redraft, and then kind of the evolution of our cares as well as the podcast has just transitioned us to basically just like discovery season, which is like dynasty season, which is our favorite season now, and then like some redraft stuff, but only the fun stuff that we wanted to do, which is like at the beginning before anything's decided, we'll do like redraft preseason episodes on that. But other than that, we don't do the weekly podcast so much in season because there's so much good content out there that I can barely have enough time to consume, and I'm doing it all day, 2 times speed all day. So
yeah, I'm with you. That 2 times speed, I've noticed. I think I tend to talk faster because of listening to podcasts sometimes. Yes. And I always want, in my head, I should probably slow down a little bit, even when I'm talking to you guys. Right now, I think about that. I do want to let's just get that right now so I don't forget, because you made a good point. Give me 2, 3, whatever it is. I know that there's so many more, but show some love to some of your favorite fantasy analysts, podcasts, blogs, whatever it is that you want to. Each one of you gave me maybe a Mount Rushmore or something.
Okay. I'm bringing up my Spotify right now and just going to scroll through them. I listen to...
Proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. I do listen to like almost all of the Athletic podcast. Most of the like beat reporter ones are awesome. I like to like, for fantasy news, you like to go like straight to the source versus having it given to you with some kind of angle or something from certain fantasy sites. But podcast wise, we have Legendary Upside, which is a new one. So I think it's with Pat Carrain. So I think he won the maybe Underdog Championship recently. So he comes out with one. I would mention Fantasy Footballers, but I feel like everyone knows that one. I do Fantasy Points podcast. Dynasty Debates is a good one. I really like the Yahoo Sports, which isn't really fantasy based, but they give lots of good football information that I generally don't hear anywhere else. And I'm listening a lot of other places. Obviously, Matt Harmon. You can also just subscribe to his site, and it's pretty good. The Dynasty Interview, they do really good player breakdowns. I could go on, but Payton, you can go ahead.
Yeah, don't take all of his thunder.
That was solid. No, it's fine. I'll just do a couple that you didn't mention. And Seth just walks for his day job, so he is on it always. So it's actually fitting that he just listed like 20 different podcasts that are relatively off the beaten trail. I like because it's so different. I really like what Matt Kelly is doing over at the Roto Underworld Network. And I'm a big fan of Liz Loza as well.
You've always had a crush on her.
So
I wouldn't say that that's true, but all right.
Yeah, well, earlier too, you mentioned some. Well, let's get the name Crossroads Fantasy. You kind of gave you kind of, what's the word I was looking for? You kind of hinted towards like why the name Crossroads, but maybe double back. Why the name Crossroads Fantasy?
Yeah, that was Seth's doing. So great name, Seth. But I think it's something that we've leaned into as the years have gone by. At first, it was like we were just always seemed to be at odds when we were texting. And so like if we're going to have a show, we might as well make it about actual disagreements so that, you know, from the listener's point of view, there could be some resolution that might not be told, but just rather understood by hearing both sides equally. But now we try so hard to make sure to devil's advocate every single thing. And even if there's a take that seems rock solid, to us, the most interesting thing that you can do is just poke a few holes in it, even if you know you're going to be wrong, because that gives you the most comprehensive look into what's going on.
You know, I don't remember if it was Seth or Payton mentioned earlier about at the beginning we were probably more structured. Now maybe it's more free-flowing. Whether that was because of just feeling more comfortable on the mic or not, give the listener of the show that's sitting here going, you know what, they started this 5 years ago. I've really been thinking about starting my own. Like, what advice would you give to a listener of the show that just wants to start their own podcast? Make
sure it sounds good. There's times, at least when I'm on my route, where I kind of give a hint on what my job is. But there's times where if I'm outside and it's loud outside, I can't even hear the podcast. I won't be able to listen to that one. I can't have headphones in my route. So make sure the sound quality is good. And that's like step one for me. And then just enjoy doing what you're doing on the podcast. If you're like really bland about it and are just reading off a sheet, that wouldn't be very interesting to me.
Yeah, do whatever the heck you want to do. And I think what shapes the show for Seth and I is we are also consumers of fantasy content. And so if one or two things we like just make us, you know, slap our foreheads, or we don't know why this is happening, or we don't think this is very good, then you just do the opposite. And if you think that's good and you think that's interesting, then keep doing it.
What's the biggest, I mean, I don't want to call it the crossroad, but because I want to play into the name, but like the fork in the road, the detour, like the biggest player take that you guys, I don't want to say argument, but you got into a disagreement about either on air or off air.
Who are those? Was it Dallas Goedert and Johnny Smith? Like the most, was that it? It was the most pointless like argument of.
That was it.
I think you actually.
That was it.
Do you remember the details of it? You were getting really mad at my Dallas Goedert side, which I ended up being right, but I think I was wrong technically in the argument, even though I never admitted it.
That's exactly what you said was perfect. Yeah, it doesn't have to be big. Like, I think we disagree all the time, and it can be about just actual opinions on whether a player is good, but it could also be about the logic behind what the argument is that we're trying to make. Sure. Yeah. And in this case, we had this small discussion about who had more upside going into the next year, and it was going to be Jonnu Smith versus Dallas Goedert. And I was so upset because Seth kept throwing stats from the previous year in my face, which were like not good, but relatively average, which is fine. They could improve. That wasn't my beef. But then he would compare them to Jonnu's, who at the time had the job to himself, and he had only otherwise been a backup. So I was like, you can't. We're talking about upside. You can't. I'm not asking about the safest. I'm not asking who's going to finish best. I'm just saying like who could theoretically probably do the best if you took a look at their ceiling, and we couldn't decide on it. So we had we did cover it in the show, but pages and pages
text.
of receipts on that one where we couldn't get to the end of it, and it was just like which middling tight end was going to be be thought about a little bit differently than the other tight end.
Like player wise about that was pretty irrelevant, but the process we try and do the process, and we want that to be hammered down, and then the player takes kind of come through that.
No, I mean, that's a good point because going back to we'll use the Crossroads name. I like it when I'm listening and I have two differing opinions, and they come to it with a good, I mean, I hate to use a fantasy football all the time, but like the judge, when they bring them to the court and stuff, and then, they got to state their case. That's one example of, I can hear both, but naturally I do tend subconsciously to lean towards, okay, this guy, I always like his running back takes. So I kind of always naturally go with, so I do that a little bit. Do you guys, I mean, have you received feedback through the podcast from any listeners, emails, tweets, whatever it might be, just in the past?
For player takes?
Or anything, just in general, have you had communication? I mean, because it's hard for those out there sometimes from a podcast perspective just to say, hey, is anybody listening to me kind of thing?
I'll let you take this one, Payton.
Well, just the way that you phrase a question made me think of something that we do to each other. So just to go inside versus outside real quick, like as opposed to just player to player, we try to do it to each other generally, just about the direction of our takes depending on the show. Because I remember there was like a 2 to 3 year stretch where in talking about dynasty and even just drafting rookies in the first few rounds, I would obsessively look for what we would call a 3D running back, which is just like basically being all purpose. Like you can actually have the volume in between the 20s, but you're, sizable or trustable enough to be used in the goal line, but also have sure enough hands or receiving aptitude to be used for pass catching as well. And I would try so hard to like find these like non-mainstream backs that would technically be 3D because like look at their college production and look at their skill set and you put it together and you see something nice, but they were like lower profile players, and I would boost them up in my rankings because it's just like, well, I'd rather have a guy that could hit than to get like a guy that's really good at one thing, because then they're always just going to be a secondary player and they're just going to be flex value, and I want the RB1, RB2. So it was like, you're just choosing bad players. Like you're choosing players that have high reception totals, that got decent production, that are like above 205 pounds, but they're like they're not good. They're just going to be backups. So like, but so many 107s and 108s in my rookie drafts, just like squandered at players that I was just like, look at this guy, he can do it all. And so that changed the way that I draft. And now I'm able to like look around and find more value from other positions because I realize that I'm more apt to do that one thing. And that's something that just like we'll just always try to, perform the Crossroads view, not only on player to player, but just like on a thing that's happening over what could be an episode, but could also be 2 to 3 years in a row with specific examples. So thank you, Seth, on that. But yeah, I don't know that we've necessarily, I don't know if this is for better or worse, but we haven't really changed course based on things that we've been hearing from the outside. We've always just taken, and Seth mentioned this, but just like we've become a little bit more nomadic about it, but we're just kind of doing what we want to do because at the end of the day, we started it because we liked it. And generally when you do the stuff that you like, you become more happy. And so we just kind of kept it that way.
Yeah, I mean, even if no one was listening, you two would still hop on the mic and talk to each other, right? I mean,
argue. Yep. Bicker.
Yeah, because texting can be hard. So yeah, what's the difference between a phone call and a recorded phone call,
What about, so in the future, what do you have plans for maybe this upcoming season? Any kind of episodes or specific direction that you're taking the show?
You've hit us in our like one spurt of energy, Arnie, because I think I set a date so we could actually tell you, but I think like by mid-May, we'll start pumping out our 2022 rookie recap of how we did last year, because we like to look back kind of in your time machine-esque and see if we can learn anything before we do our 2023 rookie mock draft, where we just nail 48 player takes in 4 separate episodes, and then that's every week, and that carries us into the beginning of redraft season, where we do like our guys for like wide receiver, running back, all the positions, and then we're out again for like next summer. I think it's maybe like 12 total episodes a year now, which isn't many less than we were doing before weekly, but it's just far less of a crunch. We tried to watch every game possible on NFL Game Pass when we did in-season stuff to like try and like grind that way. Didn't really find that I was winning any more championships like that, and the fun level had gone down a little, so we transitioned to what was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we thought about like what's most valuable to not only for us to be doing, but to us, and we generally landed on, well, you head into the season and you start liking the right players, you generally have good seasons. Then you finish the season and you're able to look back and see if you can get a little bit better based on some of the mistakes that you made in your analysis. That makes you better for the next season. And so we do that in a few specific ways that we've kind of honed in on, especially when it comes to dynasty and rookies. And then just developing, players that we like at each position moving into the season, like Seth said.
I mean, I think that also leads into, this is for the listener of the show that's thinking about starting their own podcast. There's not a specific way you have to do anything. It's whatever fits you. And one of you two put that out there while we're still having fun. But when it was in the season, it got to be a grind and it wasn't as fun. And that's true. If it's not fun, it's like, well, don't do it then. Do it for yourself kind of thing. What was I going to ask you? Now you guys are going to have to delay so I can come up with a question in my head.
Something else that I would mention was doing the weekly grind was those episodes they expire like in the week. Like if I'm off of work a week and I'm unable to listen to podcasts, I don't even bother downloading those ones. And we wanted something like, I find it fun, at least for myself, to go back and listen once we start doing our 2022 recap. We'll have to go and obviously review what we said at the time. I still find those episodes enjoyable versus like no one wants to go listen to like a weekly week 6, whatever was happening then. That's why I like your podcast as well. Like you can listen to these at any time. And I think that's also what we've transitioned to a bit to be, have a little longer expiration date.
Yeah. If I get in.
Yeah, that's exactly true.
If I get into it, and that's the Sports History Network, you hit it on the head there. Like we're all evergreen because it's all talking about historical perspectives. But if I get into more time available, I would start a show sometime taking this fantasy football origin stories to a different, maybe, okay, now it's talking to all the analysts, but more from a strategic perspective and, that type of thing versus like player takes and such. You did remind me, even if you didn't know it, I wanted to make sure the listener of the show knows, one of you tell us what the name of the podcast is, and if they want to find your work, where can they get it?
Payton, you're the media man.
Oh, sure, I'll take it.
I should have said that, yeah.
Yeah, Crossroads Fantasy Football Podcast, Crossroads FFP on Twitter.
All right, cool. And so they can do that. This is not I don't know why. I typed this down earlier when you guys were talking about the Madden stuff, and then we jumped into fantasy football. But did either one of you ever play Madden just so you could simulate the season, so you could draft and then simulate and then draft and simulate?
I did that more recently than I'd like to admit. Like probably pre-baby. Yeah, I was in
when you have the baby, that's when you're taking a nap and you got time to do it. You just might only have one hand. It's just perfect. So
it made me actually trade for Noah Fant, which is a mistake because I kept de-aging him because I loved using him so much in Madden because he is like the athletic freak that he is. So you actually can just use him like that instead of actually whatever's wrong in between the helmet. For whatever reason, fantasy wise, he hasn't worked out yet, but I just kept making him 24 again because I wanted him on my Tennessee Titans forever. And then I was like, I got to go trade for this guy. So yes, I did do that. And I loved unearthing like the gems later on in the draft you'd spend your points on.
Yeah, I'm a pure sicko, you can tell, because that was something that like me and my cousin, my brother, we would sit around. Like, geez, we're talking about when I was in high school and my brother, but not even high school yet, just sitting there simulating Madden seasons. Like, what sickos would do something like that for fun? It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, moving on from that, let's take the whole DeLorean deal again. We're going to go 20 years in the future, and either something you'd like to see different in fantasy football or guess about what might happen in fantasy football 20 years from now different than it is today.
Yeah, I'll take it first. I like unique leagues that develop over time and take a depth of understanding that's outside of normal plug-and-play leagues. So if I could see a step toward more customization and even having broader access to more styles of leagues in a more unified way and in a more accessible way, that would be an excellent thing, I think, for fantasy players looking to just nerd out more and more. All right, we've got our categories that we can all fall into, but you always hear about this league and you're like, whoa, that sounds cool, but I think I wouldn't be good about it until like the fourth year or something like that. We're probably also in those leagues. Just having more of that at your fingertips in some sort of like a database way would be really interesting to me. You're
smart to go first because I was going to say something similar, especially as like not to like gloat on the industry, but I do feel like the industry as a whole is getting better at predicting future seasons. So you need to have like some way to mix up like what makes the league hard, and that might be like different positional like limits. Like maybe you don't have any positional limits, you can just start like maybe you have to start a quarterback but the rest are whatever you want, or like particular scoring. I have this goofy quarterback model that I ask our league to what's the word, to take on, I guess, every year. That is like only the, like, I think Justin Fields scored like negative 9 points per game in it this year because it heavily weights passing stats. But just like make the scoring more descriptive for the players, so then that in turn makes it harder to be predictable, because I feel like it will become more predictable as, you know, whether it's us or AI or whatever is able to forecast future seasons better. We got to find another way to make this challenging for ourselves, which is the fun part.
Also, just more dynasty. That's what I mean. You own your own mistakes, but you can fix it. It actually matters what's going on in March and August and January, all the same. Like just stuff that keeps engagement higher and more consistent, holding one team dear, and just like having more competitive dynasty leagues where it actually means something to work your way into a year-over-year contender. It just doesn't seem like that's the current landscape, at least on a casual level. So like if we're talking like dripping down from I guess you would call the industry, if more casual folks were more invested into their leagues, which I think happens with Dynasty, that would be very cool.
And that's a common theme I've heard at least 2 or 3 different times on this show now when I've asked one of these questions. And when you think about it, yeah, because we all have those home leagues where you have 3 that drop off after week 5. You have like 3 or 4 more that drop off after when the playoffs aren't, you know, they're gearing up for the playoffs. And it's just like, man, I just want that consistency. But then if you can get that hardcore group of dynasty that are in it for the long haul, then in theory, maybe they would stick around longer. You made me think of 2 different things, Seth. So the first one was, no, I just lost it because I was dringing up there, but you were talking about, remind me, what were you talking about? I
have a silly quarterback model.
Silly quarter. Okay, yeah. Oh, the negative thing. I had a really weird one too. The one time where it was, if they had a missed extra point, it was like minus 50 points or something like that for the. So talk about guys that hate kicker leagues. I don't remember why I did that. It was probably because I was like so upset with the. But no, the other one. What was the other question? It made me think of. Geez, it's not a huge deal, but Anyway, I wanted to let's just move on to the next one. And really the thing is just like, how do we close this out is my question. Normally I go give a good advice and you guys have both already done that. So let's fit in here. So if you had any last words of wisdom for the listener of the show through the lens of someone looking at it from the Crossroads, Payton, what would you tell them?
Man, like forcibly address your weaknesses or your mistakes. Like identify a decision that you made that didn't go that well, and then try to take a couple steps back from it and ask if like so a lot of things you just like need to make a call and they can go right and they can go wrong and it doesn't have anything to do with your process. But some of them do uncover random things about the process. And all the time we go and we find something that's relatively true, but then we take it way too far in one direction. And so then it's time to try it back. And oftentimes we find something like maybe a stat or maybe a concept that's like, we need to focus on this year. And then you do it, but you probably do it a little bit too much and you're not that good. And then you need to pull it back. You just like have some time for yourself where you just like take a look at some of the decisions that you made, whether you recorded them, whether you wrote them down, or whether you can just like go back into the history. Why did I do it? How do I get a little bit better for next time? And consistently compare that year over year, and you'll probably get super good.
What about you, Seth? Any last words of wisdom for the listener of the show?
Yeah, and I guess mine would be more, if you're looking to get into like recording based, would be like, we've even said it, we do it because it makes us happy, but also I would say we do it because we want listeners, we want like people to listen to us. So wherever you can find somewhere that will like take on that voice for you and make it louder, go and do that and find it and search that out, because that will also make you happier too. Like it's fun to like play catch, like I'll use this for an example, I guess. Like, it's fun to like toss a football to yourself and like say you're having a good time, but I'd rather have Payton to throw it to back and forth and maybe like have some people watch and see how good we are at it. And then that's football, and that's fun, and that's how everyone has fun. If more.
Well, sorry about that ending there. It kind of cut Seth off when the software dropped out. I didn't get the whole thing, but basically, it was at the drop the hammer moment. You know what I mean? It was at the very end. You got it. You pretty much knew where he was going with it. I mean, he basically said, head out there, start your own show, but make sure you do it for fun and to get as many people that enjoy, you know, the whole type of concept that you're talking about, and make sure that you enjoy being around them, get them involved. One way to do that is to contact us over here at the Sports History Network. We have plenty of podcasters for sports history, but we also have a great passion for most of us of fantasy football. In fact, we have our own Sports History Network Fantasy Football League every year. We won't talk about who was always the champ and all that stuff, but at any rate, we'd be happy to help get you started with your own show if you want to come on over and talk about some sports history of some sorts. It's kind of easier if you could just ask people that have already done it some questions on, hey, how do I start this whole thing? I mean, you know, do I need a mic? Do I need to, you know, talk about, I don't know, these different kind of imposter syndromes with my voice, all this type of stuff. So we have plenty of podcasters that have gone through the same thing that you have. Anything that you can think of from sports history, you know, even like this one. This is a fantasy football history show, and that's why I kind of sneak it in the Sports History Network, if you know what I mean. That's why it's the origin stories. We're not talking about rankings. We're not talking about this upcoming year's gems or sleepers. I mean, we might talk about that too, because how can you talk about fantasy football without that stuff a little bit? Hey, well, besides the point. Again, sports history. So if you're interested in starting your own show or contributing even via like maybe creating an article, maybe being a guest on another show, all you got to do is head over to the contact page at sportshistorynetwork.com. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com. You fill out that contact page, that email goes right to yours truly, and I will make sure I get back to you as soon as possible. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fantasy Football Origin Stories. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please make sure to mash that little subscribe or follow button on your podcast player of choice, then head over to the website for the show notes and more fantasy football origin stories. That's at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude. And I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, you know, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website, seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.